And I'm going to call the July 25th, 2024 meeting of the Local Comprehensive Planning Committee to order. This meeting will be televised via Xfinity Channel 8 or High Definition Channel 1072, and it may be also accessed via the Government Access Channel live stream. In accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20, the committee must inquire whether anyone is taping this meeting and to please make their presence known. Seeing none, next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from May 30th, 2024.
Oh, no.
Motion?
I'll make a motion to accept
Second.
it.
Moved and seconded to approve the minutes from May 30th, 2024. Any discussion, changes? Seeing none, all members in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That's unanimous. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Anyone here to speak to the group? Seeing none, we'll move into the topics for discussion. Kate?
Good evening. Kate Maldonado, Senior Planner with Planning and Development. Glad to be regrouping after not being together for some time. So what we'll be working on tonight, I'm going to first start with a quick overview of this process of updating our local comprehensive plan. We haven't been together in some time with scheduling conflict, and we are at a crucial point now before we start to dive into some really monumental efforts. So I just want to take us some time to consider where we're at and what our next steps are. And then we're very fortunate to have Bob Frazee here. He's the chair of the Barnstable Historical Commission, who's here to provide some answers to any questions that you may have. During the month of June, we did pre-recordings for our experts related to culture, heritage, and design. And so Bob is here with regard to that presentation, speaking to historic preservation and any questions that the committee members may have on that topic. And then we're going to dive into the goals and strategies related to our last two chapters that we're working through, that culture, heritage, and design, as well as the facilities chapter. So at that time, we'll break out together to dive into that exercise. So updating a master plan is an intense effort, and there's several steps which make it a success. So the first step in updating this plan was to do our existing conditions report. Before you dive into the future, it's really important to understand where you're at, a snapshot of where you're at today. So we did that report, and it includes data and narrative for our community systems, our built systems, and our natural systems. And that was in collaboration with staff and our consultant team. So that really gave us the baseline of where we are as a community today before we look towards the future. A master plan is the community's plan. So beyond just the data that the existing conditions plan provided, it's really important that we work with our community to develop that vision for the future. So we spend a significant amount of time, and I know the screen is difficult to read, all listed on our website, but a tremendous amount of time going out to our community, from coffee socials to attending soccer games and talking with parents on the side of the field to going to civic associations. We were at community events, Halloween on Main Street, Great Streets, etc. We really made the initiative to meet our people where they were at to work on that vision, which our final vision statement, which expresses our vision for the future with natural resources, housing, transportation, infrastructure, all those important topics, thinking about the future, the vision of our community. And all of those efforts culminated with that big Bringing It Together workshops that we did in the winter. So working from that existing conditions report, the data, and then the visioning with all the imperative knowledge from our community, the next step was to dive into specific topics. And that's what we've been working on since the fall of last year. And those topics, we have those 6 chapters: land use, housing, natural resources, infrastructure and facilities, economic development, culture, heritage, and design. So we basically gave about a month to each of these chapters to think about issues and opportunities with these topics, as well as goals and strategies. And that's what we're going to finish this evening with, those last 2 chapters. We also obtained insight from experts, both staff experts on a local level as well as regional experts, to make sure that we had insight for best practice strategies, local issues and opportunities, what our staff wants to see for the future of Barnstable. So those were very important as well. And all these pieces, from the existing conditions report to the visioning with our community, specific topic chapters, and expert insight, have been the building blocks that have led us to these two next steps, which are really important. And I know myself, I'm very excited to dive into these next steps. So that'll include looking at our future land use map, as well as getting into specific actions with our action plan. So working from the strategies and the goals that we've developed to date to take them into specific targeted actions that we can pass on for implementation. The future land use map will start a significant mapping exercise at our next meeting in August. And the first step will be looking at our 2010 map, looking at the strategies that was displayed in that map, including areas that were identified for redevelopment, commercial areas, pedestrian areas. We'll look at that map and think about what we want to keep the same, what will stay stable, and what will change. You all have copies of this map, so I'll give you a little task of homework to look at this more closely, because it's a little bit easier on this scale versus the map before you. For the public, it's also included with the meeting materials and online on our website as well. So this will be the first part in the mapping exercise, is to see what strategies were identified in 2010 and see how those strategies should stay the same or how they should change. So that'll be what we dive into in August. And we're also going to look at the strategies that we've developed to date for all of our chapters, and more specifically the place-based strategies. And we'll dive into groups and really dive into that mapping, looking at those strategies and seeing where we want to get our pens out and start mapping where we want to see them on a geographical layer. And I think that will be a great exercise, because we've worked on these strategies, but now it's time to see where we want them implemented across town. So we'll start on that in August. And then in the fall, we'll take all this information and work on this final step, which is developing the action plan with those very specific targeted actions that we can direct to responsible parties and implement performance measures in order to track those over time. So we're proposing now that action plan is structured pretty similar to other communities, where you have short-term actions, mid-term actions, and long-term actions, so we can see how they'll be developed over time. We'll make sure that each of them have those performance measures to track them, and that's important, so that way we can see where we're at with the actions and if more resources need to be allocated, et cetera. As time's going by, we'll identify responsible parties to help implement them, any potential funding source, and then we'll also define any items that align with more than one chapter for reference as well. We're also proposing that we work through these targeted actions to prioritize top 5 or 10, and that'll be really important to help with implementation, so that way we have very specific actions and where the community prioritization is. And that'll be something we work with the community as well, in addition to that mapping exercise. So this committee will take the first review at that mapping exercise, and then there will be opportunity for the community to review and respond as well. So those are the next two big items that we're getting into, that are all coming from the building blocks that we've worked on collectively to date through this process. Also just want to talk about scheduling, because that aligns with how we're going to achieve these efforts and timing. So we're going to keep through the summer, like we said, we would keep to the one meeting a month with a summer obligation. So in August, we're going to kick off that future land use mapping exercise. We're going to keep to just that one meeting, Thursday, August 22nd. In September, we're going to start back with meeting twice a month, with the school season starting, and we have a lot of material we need to cover. We'll jump back into 2 meetings. So that first meeting in September, the mapping exercise with all the topics that the master plan covers, we anticipate that mapping exercise taking 2 meetings. So we'll start in August. We'll continue into September. We'll have another meeting in September that's kind of a placeholder right now. If we don't finish everything tonight, or as other topics come up, we want to keep that on the book. So we'll meet the 2nd and the 4th Thursday in September, and I'll send this all out via email. Just want to give you a heads up as you're thinking of scheduling. More importantly, I wanted to bring up the schedule for October. Due to schedule conflicts, we're changing the dates in October. So it's going to be Tuesday, October 8th, and Wednesday, October 30th. I'll send out those details, but those will be the 2 meetings in October. And during that month, we're dedicating October to working on our action plan. So by that time, we'll have the chapters done with our goals and strategies. We'll have ideas for our future land use map, starting to look through those strategies, and then really dive into those targeted actions during the month of October. So those are the meetings that are coming up and the exercises associated with those meetings. And I'll send that out to you because I'll also be canceling those October meetings that I had originally booked for the 2nd and 4th since those meetings are changing. But I'll send you this list with all the dates and give you a good idea of how the dates are shifting, particularly in October. Really quickly, it's very important that we continue to promote the local comprehensive plan, to encourage our community to be engaged and involved. So we always take advantage of any opportunity to help communicate this effort. I'm not sure if you noticed, but during early July, when the tax bills were sent out, we worked with finance in order to incorporate a insert, as shown displayed on the screen, that provided information on the local comprehensive plan with a QR code, which was translated in Spanish and Portuguese, just reminding our community of this important long-range plan and encouraging members of the community to get involved. So, and if any members have any other ideas of how to promote this important effort, we really appreciate your feedback. But on a staff level, we're also looking for those opportunities and taking advantage of what we can to help spread the word. So the next exercise that we'll do is we will talk about, oh, I'm sorry.
Is it able to were you able to have like a translator for people to come in? Because I realize that we have people who are Portuguese and speak other languages that can't really attend our meeting because it's all in English.
So we do have a translator on contract who's come to a few of our meetings, and that's something that we'll continue to implement. So that way there's opportunity for, especially when we're diving into the next big items, especially the action plan, we'll make sure that we have a translator there to help ensure that everyone can understand what's being discussed and how to be involved.
Because I feel like if we reach out to the communities of color and the immigrant community and we advise that there's a translator and that this impacts their communities as well, we might get a lot more people from those communities to attend our meetings on a semi-regular basis.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Kate, we have in the past actually put on there that there will be a translator available, and it's been on some of the things with the QR codes in the past.
Yep, for some of the, Cheryl's correct, for several of the community meetings, we have advertised that there would be translation services, and we'll continue. It's our intent to continue that, especially, like I said, when we're at important milestones where there's a good amount of material to review. And the LCP website has a button to translate the language on there, so you can click that translate button, and there's drop downs with different opportunities with different languages.
Are we having track, the percentage of people that are participating on this, that it is? So just to see, I have to work harder to have the community involved. Are we able to see if we are having participation?
So with every translated material that we've done, we do have documentation. So with the, for example, the survey that's gone out, the survey questions on the chapters that have gone out, we do have record of how many have been answered in Spanish and Portuguese. We can definitely share that.
A remind, if I'll be talk to you, it's, if they see how much are the involvement. I'm curious to see, if we're growing or not, or it was it. So.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yep, I can definitely pass that along. Any further questions? Okay, so during the month of June, as mentioned, we had some scheduling conflicts, so we weren't able to meet. So we got creative with ensuring that we could keep on the schedule. And so we actually pre-recorded our expert presentation. So in arts and culture, we heard from Melissa Chartrand, who is our arts and culture coordinator for the town of Barnstable. And then, as mentioned earlier, we're very fortunate, and tonight you're able to talk with Bob Frazee, who is the chair of the Barnstable Historical Commission, and truly the community really is blessed to have him as a champion for historic preservation. And so we sent around these presentations, recordings for the committee members for you to review in advance of this meeting so that you could provide obtain insight for issues and opportunities for these topics, as well as some ideas for future goals and opportunities. So those expert presentations, I just want to remind members of the committee and the public, they're available on the website. So our document library has buttons for each of the chapters. So under the culture and heritage button, the expert presentations are linked right there. So that way you could watch those presentations. So at this time, I am going to hand the mic over to Bob Frazee. If the committee members have any questions based on his presentation on historic preservation. And I also wanted to know if you had any specific questions for arts and culture, please send them to staff and we can coordinate them with Melissa. She had a conflict this evening, but we definitely want to make sure that you're obtaining that information and any questions that you have for culture, heritage, and design is being answered.
Thank you very much. Kate, any questions for Bob regarding Historical Commission and its work?
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
You may be thoroughly sick of hearing from me if you watched that whole video. I would understand that. But I enjoyed the conversation I just heard a minute or two ago in terms of how to reach a broader audience and include them. That's one of the things I think is so important.
Could you speak a little bit louder?
Yes, sorry. I was saying I was very cheered by the little conversation I heard just a moment ago about including a broader constituency, I think, in all matters concerning the town, but even in this particular planning process. And before I noticed that, I was going to say I think the planning department's a great example for finding methodology to employ to include broader and broader constituencies in and of itself. It's one of the mandates of a planning process to start with professionally and intuitively, and I think all of the boards and committees and commissions in the town do well to try and follow that practice whenever it's possible. I'll try not to get on my soapbox too much.
Anyone else? Anyone? Questions? Well, go ahead. Throw out a couple.
Yeah, dive in. Grill me, whatever you like.
You've got the right one today.
Okay.
So we're going to start with my first question. So when we're defining what is historical, because I know a lot of, I've come to town council meetings, other committee meetings, right? And people like to throw the word historical around. They're saying, is the 60s considered historical in your book? What year period do you consider historic, and what do you consider the culture that we should be preserving?
That's a great question. It's a very good beginning point for anything about history and historical matters.
Because I'm thinking, are we going to start putting nooses, slavery, because certain people would say that that's a part of our history too.
Well, fortunately, that's not something I'm in charge of preserving one way or another or making that decision, but I take your point. And I don't know the answer to that. To me, I feel a little historical just being here. When Fran and Lindsay and I were talking before the meeting, I was thinking back to when the town invented a town flag, and I forgot that it's right there behind all of you, but there it is. Nobody sees it unfurled much. And I thought what a great idea it would be to have it available in a smaller one-sided copy to give to graduates from Barnstable High School every year. And I still think that would be a very cost-effective way of putting our thumbprint on our kids before they disappear for a while. And maybe it's a good excuse around which to have a small historical curriculum about what matters in the Barnstable town's history that we want to talk about with them and have them be involved with and hear from them whether it interests them, hear from them whether it matters. I don't think we're in the position of making something matter to people. I think we need to find out what does matter to them. In terms of what is historical, it depends on who you ask and when, and I know you're asking me now, so I'm going to be evasive for a minute while my mind is partly thinking about the answer. In terms of the commission's work, As you may know, we have a thing called a demolition delay ordinance, which I'm very grateful for because from a preservationist perspective, it's about the only tool in the box that gives you a chance to have a good conversation with people who may be of a mind to erase an old building. And we evaluate the building's significance initially on the basis of its age. And technically, it's in the written document, so it's maybe arbitrary as opposed to specific, but it's 75 years of age or older. If you're talking about a National Register property, technically a property can be made to qualify for the National Register and a listing there if it's as young as 50 years ago, but it has to be under special circumstances, otherwise it's longer. What is historical is, to me, what is the constituency that cares about the thing or the event or the place? The Sandwich Boardwalk, to me, is historical because it's a place that has made people have really strong feelings about being there for generations now. And we've got a town full of those as well, but that one's been in the news a lot in the last few years, and the back and forth about how would it be rebuilt and wouldn't it. If any of you know a gentleman by the name of Dean Coe, who was one of the champions of rebuilding that boardwalk back in the 1990s, he's the one who invented the carved planks with inscriptions on it to help raise funds to do it. But it's also how people bought in to the place, and they would take their family members there and they would look for their engraved plank. So how many places now have engraved bricks on their walkways? Barnstable Village has them. Tales of Cape Cod has a program going. Cotuit Library has one. Lots of places do it. It's a great idea. Significance is kind of in the eye of the perceiver or beholder. It's not something for we as a commission to dictate to someone else. It's not clearly and easily defined. I think one of the major precepts of my whole presentation, if I had one in that video, was I'd like us to be on a mission of discovery rather than one of stating facts too much. But to answer your question, if it's a building that has much of its original character, if it's distinguished by any one of several different things which are defined by the National Park Service in their documentation for National Register listings, and those are picked up by the State Historic Preservation Office as well, then typically those are key elements. Age, association with persons of great importance, either locally or nationally, association with cultural or economic development within the community or on a broader national scale. And that gets to the point where things can be significant here in the town of Barnstable and be historically valuable, and maybe nobody outside of Barnstable would care. That's true in the state of Massachusetts. It doesn't have to be of national importance to be worth preserving in many cases. And we're going to be up against an interesting time in the next few years as the buildings that were produced after World War II, mid-century, mid-20th century buildings, start to become 75 years old. And it's already happening. And there were a lot of houses built between the end of World War II and, say, 1965 or something. And a lot of them, to some of us, especially if you're architecturally sensitive, tend to look not the same, but plain. They're not remarkable. They were built for housing, which is a great cause. You know, there's nothing wrong with that, but they're not all of them remarkable. One of them I said was, in my little presentation, is the, oh gosh, I've forgotten the name of it, but the Lustron House in Hyannis. Most people would never think of that, but that's pretty cool. So there are exceptions, and we're going to need to be looking for the exceptions and being careful not to hold up the progress that may be required for the town to grow. I think the big challenge, and this is one of the things that was asked of me when I was interviewed by the Appointments Committee not more than a year or two ago, was, so how do you blend the need for modernity and change with historic preservation? And I said two things. One is I think the two go very well together if they're high quality, and I really do believe that. And the other is, I think as the generations change, there will be a change in architecture, in sensibilities about things, in what is valued and what is not, what is to be preserved and what is not, which I hate to go in circles, but it brings me back to I want to find out what people think they think is going to be important 10 or 15 or 25 years from now, not just dwell on what I grew up thinking was important, because, you know, I'm not going to be here forever. None of us are. That's a very long-winded answer, but you gave me a chance. Watch out. Thank you.
I still have more questions.
I bet you do.
but I'll let
Okay.
you all go.
Anyone else?
I have a follow-up, Dave.
Sure.
Question if you.
Sure.
Thank you. This issue of what we consider historical is not only what are we going to preserve on a building-by-building, site-by-site basis, but, you know, one of the things that we're doing, one of the chapters in the comprehensive plan, a portion of one of the chapters deals with design.
Yes.
And there are a number of boards and commissions of the town that, as part of their responsibilities, deal with the issue of design. Planning Board deals with design guidelines, the Downtown Main Street Harbor Historical Commission deals with design guidelines. I'm sure there's other commissions and boards that deal with design guidelines. And over the past year or so, some of these boards and commissions have done a lot of work trying to look at developing guidelines to be put down so that developers and landowners can kind of have a view of what would be favorably received and what would not be favorably received.
Sure.
And I think it's fair to say that in the course of that discussion, it became clear, as you have suggested in your opening remarks, that a historical period is to a certain extent in the minds of the beholder. You know, some people might think the 1600s are the historical period that we should preserve. Other people say the 1700s. At a public meeting, one fellow came up and said the 1950s and 1960s, which was completely off the charts of anything that anyone in that hearing, those boards were considering. So the idea of what's historical is in the eyes of the beholder, frankly, doesn't help us much.
No, I understand your point.
Yeah. So if we're going to draft guidelines to preserve a certain type of history, we kind of really have to figure out, you know, is it 1600s and 1700s combined? Is it mid-century, 20th century? Is it impossible? Really, is the bottom. And I don't know if that's the gist of Asia's question, but if it wasn't, I want to build on it.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm not trying to be so evasive that it becomes a useless answer, for sure, and I get your point. I think you're right. I would go to that slide I had put up that was of the two potential redevelopable sites here on Main Street. One is the TD Bank, and the other's the, the motel. I can't think of the name. It begins with a C. Cascade. Thank you very much. And I only picked them because I'm aware of them. I know they're in some preliminary regard for planning for redevelopment. And I heard one person whose perspective on things I respect a great deal say, I looked and I couldn't find an old building there at all. And she was referring to the TD Bank building. And I will say it's hard to see. You have to go to the right place to look for it. What was I looking for? Well, I was first looking for the building identified as the 1924 bank, and I must admit it's embedded in all sorts of other stuff already, let alone what may or may not happen later on. Is it worthy of saving? I don't know. I don't know the building. What I would say is it's worth looking at, it's worth considering, because it's part of the pattern of development that has evolved along Hyannis's Main Street through the town's history, and it represents a time and a period and an era, and I think it should be considered whether it's more valuable to erase that and build whatever anybody wants there versus retaining the building, or if not retaining the building, retaining some of the stylistic components, including the materials or the coloring or the shape and size of it, some of the massing, the scale and proportions. That's considered good design normally. And if somebody's coming from Kansas with an architect, I'm not picking on Kansas, by the way, who has no knowledge of the region, no interest in the area, but has a client who wants to do a thing and get a job done, and I'm using a preposterous example on purpose. I hope it's preposterous anyway. Is that what Barnstable wants? Doesn't Barnstable want to have something that looks and feels like it belongs here, even if it's new? And I think new can be very compatible with old and vice versa, as long as they feel like they respect one another a bit. Yes, I'm still being evasive. I'm not going to give you a date. I'm not going to say, anything newer than 1930 can just be trashed, because that's just not true. I don't feel that's appropriate. If I were on a planning board or a zoning board or doing site plan review or something like that, I'd probably be saying exactly the same things. I would want to see a plan for these two that celebrates what was here to some extent and then builds on it. Builds new, and it can be new. It can be new materials, but it could use some of the old colors. It can do different things that way and still work.
Okay, Cheryl, you had a question?
I was just going to follow up quickly,
Yeah.
briefly. As a Kansas State University
No, I
graduate
picked the wrong
and
state.
faculty
Wouldn't you know,
member,
I always do that.
I certainly hope you weren't picking on the state of Kansas.
Apologies.
Just to further on to my fellow commissioners' comments, we are, Bob serves on the planning, I'm also on the HHDC and historical, of course. But the HHDC and planning have been working on revamping and updating and revising and making the guidelines and ordinances in that to propose to make them, that will make them more appropriate.
Good.
But one of the things the HHDC has on, which hasn't been mentioned, is the historic, and it's in our ordinances, character. It's the historical character. But what I would, as we progress further and further into time, I would point out that with that 75 years equates into, and I'm well aware of, the 75-year thing, as you know, but a new building today will not be regarded as a new building 80, 90 years from now. So
Right.
That's why I think it's important that people are continuously looking but it has been mentioned here, as times change, and that's why, commissions change, committee members change, and one of their duties is to keep things serving the community as it existed at that time, while still preserving what they can in the character, which will hopefully reflect in new buildings later on as well.
Oh, I completely agree with that perspective on it. It brings me back to the thought, which I really was, it was ingrained in me at Roger Williams back when I was training for historic preservation, and surrounded by architects, some of whom are really world-class good people at this point. If you build something well enough and design it well enough now, the basic definition of that is that 75 years from now, or longer if you want, people will want to defend it if you want to take it down. Why will they? Well, it serves its purpose well. It pleases them to look at, whatever that may mean. It perhaps didn't offend people by its presence initially so much that it was too shocking, so it didn't run contrary to the character of the area in which it was situated. I mean, those are kind of defining characteristics of a building on a very general level that I think are good guidelines, even though they're broad.
Okay. Fran?
Hi. The bank building is a beautiful building. I'm one
Thank
of the
you.
people that remembers it very well.
Would you pull that mic a little closer?
I'm sorry. I'm one of the people that remembers the bank building very well and going in and out of there many times. I think there's a wonderful picture today in the newspaper of the wing school. They've torn down all of the wing school except for the original 1920s building.
I saw that too,
Yeah.
and I thought
And
the same
so
thought.
I think that, and then they're going to build on that add housing to that, and I think that's something that could be done with the Hyannis bank building. Somebody needs to just come up with some creative ideas. And I also wanted to add, along with houses, there are important historical vistas in the town that also should be protected. Even Time and Tide hasn't completely changed those.
I don't know what the.
Thank you, Fran. No, I agree. I mean, I think of the Cape Cod Airfield as one of those vistas. For example, when it was being lobbied 4 years ago, it was referred to as Barnstable's motif number 1 or number 2 if you wanted, but right up there. And it was unusual to think of an inland vista as important to a coastal town. And that's another example of a high character, high quality location with historic old buildings that still mean something to people and have associations, pardon me, with important people in history through time, starting from 1929 and on. I can't call it.
Sue, go ahead.
Sorry.
Could you bring the microphone closer?
All right, I'll turn it on. On Facebook, there's a page called Old Houses or something like that I get. And when I first saw it, I thought, oh, great, old houses, because we have a house that was built in the 1800s. And I thought, oh, fun, old houses. Well, it develops that there are many, many people out there who thinks that houses who were built in the 60s and 70s are old houses. So there's lots and lots of different opinions about that. And this is something that I think other people have spoken about. I think, it's not just the building, it's the village or the neighborhood or whatever. The character of that is important as well. But, and again, agreeing with what you said about historic character and new building can go together.
Oh, absolutely. they
And
can.
I think that actually it's important that they do, because in 2100, when people are looking back, 75 years ago, we want them to know not only what, went before that, but what was going on in 2024.
Yeah, what are we contributing, right?
What are we
And
contributing?
hopefully it's something
That's right.
worthwhile.
That's right.
Oh, I agree.
And if things are well done, then that fits in, and it's something that to be preserved. On the subject of the houses that were built after World War II, a neighborhood with those kinds of houses is something that's preservable.
A neighborhood is a space, a place, yes.
Yeah.
I agree with that. That will be one of the conundrums and quandaries
Yeah.
that we in planning and everyone will face at some point
Yeah.
when those are in whatever is defined as harm's way at some time.
And I guess the question that I had was, who makes a decision about whether something's preservable or not? Who decides that?
Can you be more specific about what kind of thing? You mean here in Barnstable, and is it a building or a home or something?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
Specifically and in general.
All right. Well, specifically, your historical commission does that. And I'm pretty new in the commission's chair, so I'm not going to go out on too many limbs, and I'm probably going to be playing my hand very cautiously for a while. There is a thing that's built into Section 112, which is the enabling legislation in Barnstable for the historical commission's activities under the demolition delay ordinance, that allows for the chair's discretion to determine whether a building up front has enough ingredients or enough attributes to be worthy of going to a hearing as opposed to not requiring one. And I'm on the learning curve of that, and it's very steep for me because I've never really had to think that hard, that fast, that specifically about something that I know affects other people's lives and that matters a lot. But supposing I think that it is, or it does, or in one case, maybe a friend of mine 45 years ago flagged a building doing an inventory form saying, I believe that this under criterion C deserves consideration for listing on the National Register, even if that was never followed up upon, even if she didn't write an extensive dissertation on why she felt that was so, which is the case in this case, whichever way that goes. I feel that that's not one I would simply pass on. I would like the full commission to consider that, and I would like it in a public hearing, and it means it will be advertised, and it means other people get not just their foot in their door, their voices in the room, their heads in the room, their thoughts, their values are there as well. And having done this for a little while in modern times, I did it a longer time long ago before the digital age and before demolition delay ordinances existed, the people in the room make a big difference. If a neighborhood comes out to speak for or against a thing, to support a neighbor who wants to do something with their house, even if there's something about it that worries us as a commission, we're absolutely listening. It's a community preservation effort, not just a building preservation effort. It's for neighborhoods, it's for people. And I'll go back to, if a building or a boat or a place has no one who cares about it, how is that worth preserving? You have to make a really tough argument for it. You can, in some cases, say, well, 40 years from now, they'll thank us for this. I don't like that much, but once in a very long while, there may be something that we just can't bring ourselves to say no to, but I think that's partly the answer for you. In the broader spectrum, I mean, the members of the commission are appointed by the town council. They're vetted by your appointments committee. You spread it out through the tentacles of a broader public process. If that's sufficient, good. If it's not, it could be changed. I'm not sure I have suggestions for that, but I wouldn't mind them. I mean, that's fine. I think the broader constituents you have for any big decisions, especially in a town as diverse as Barnstable to begin with and as big as Barnstable, all to the good. That's a good thing. And I've been here since the early 70s and watched people dig their heels in over everything you could think of. And that's not healthy. And nobody gets better from that,
Yeah.
in my humble opinion.
That's a very good answer. I would also add that if there's finance involved, if there's any town money involved, you've got the Community Preservation Committee and the town council that would get involved in
That requires a specific type of property, however, for us to be looking at. So CPC funds are not really available for privately held properties unless they're private nonprofits and demonstrate a public benefit, in which case then there will be a conservation or a preservation restriction drawn with MHC on legal terms. Help me out, Lindsay, if I'm going off base, but I think I'm right.
You're right.
I'm trying to do it shorthand.
That would be for the
Town hall,
the
for
Community
example,
Preservation
or-
Committee to propose
Yes. Well,
or
so
work with a homeowner.
No, we don't work with private homes.
So that's
Not
the
at
thing.
all.
That's where I want to go
thought
with
we
that,
had
though, because
back in
there's
the
a
day.
slide in my presentation that gets to that point on
Okay.
purpose, and that is the one that shows the revolving fund from Providence on one side and the Preserve Our Past, or Protect Our Past, organization from Chatham, one on a more local level, one on a distant but very observable and long experience level, where they do work with private properties. They sometimes interject in Providence nonprofit ownership on what was a private property in order to obtain multiple levels of financing to accomplish a renovated goal and improve housing equity, housing availability, housing multiplicity out of what had been a single-family residence when first constructed, say, in 18-something. But the objectives are similar and the intentions are good, and they very often end up divesting them and leaving them in private hands when they're done, so that the nonprofit is more a vehicle than the end result. I think there's a lot to be learned from looking at examples like that. I don't pretend that I've got enough bandwidth personally to be the guy to do that, but I think your planning division could, or anyone else who's willing to look at stuff like that could learn a lot and find ways to apply it here very beneficially.
Asia, you had one more question? Go ahead.
So I've looked at the makeup of our town council, a majority of our committees, and to be honest with you, as a woman of color, I am one of few people of color involved in any of the processes. I feel like people of color's viewpoint have been left out historically over what to preserve, because a house that might be important to a person of color or a community of color does not get some of the same level of protections. So my thing is, we have buildings that people of color weren't allowed to go into at certain points of time. Why would I want to preserve any of those buildings where my people were not even allowed to go in and had to drink from the other fountains?
That's a hell of a good question.
So how are you all as a commission working to ensure that the buildings that are protected, that, like, for example, the TD Bank, that building looks like a crappy bank to me, doesn't have any real historic value. I'm in my 30s. People who are a lot younger are going to look at some of these buildings and say, they don't even have Wi-Fi. Why would I want to go in? They have no air conditioning. So, I mean, I feel like the Historical Commission should also look at what the younger generation definitely considers as historical, because
I
anything...
absolutely agree with you. I mean, that is one of my things
Oh, I
in one of
know.
those slides. I absolutely feel passionately about that, too. We have not, to my knowledge, at the commission had I won't say any because my mind just might not be picking up on them, but certainly not many occasions where a kind of scenario that you just described has come up. I know that the Historical Commission was tremendously supportive years ago for the Zion Heritage Museum and all of the conversion that went to that and supporting funding through CPC and Town Council and other methodology. It's a little easier, isn't it? Because it's more obvious. So I get that. I don't know is the answer to your question, except it's why I wanted to put that out there also, because I'm concerned about it the same way. And I want whatever the decisions that are made to have some relevance and meaning in a positive way, I hope, to the broader community, not just to, a few individuals or a slice of the community, which is kind of the cultural habit of our world, our part of the world. I know that.
Gotcha.
Thank you for your work. It's important.
You pull the mic a little closer so we can hear you?
Closer, okay. Thank you for the work you're doing. It's really important. I love history, and preserve is a big thing. I just want to ask the history also when it would be more advertised, like as an immigrant, and you say, oh, this is we don't know about the history, and we would like to know more. Would like to know this building, and feel like the museum you just mentioned. There is many of the immigrants that don't know what it is for. So if we could advertise more, and it'd be wonderful.
I
And
couldn't
our
agree
kids,
more.
like they are learning at school, but most of the time you presume that everyone knows about it, but we don't know.
I wonder if we would see more younger people at our historical commission meetings coming in as members of the public to comment on things we're doing if we had a Facebook presence or other social media presences advertising our meetings. I think that's an awesome idea to try. I'm not feeling the least bit competent to do it, I want to tell you, but I think.
Fran was next.
Yes, I just wanted to say, we have a large quantity of homes that were built right after World War II.
Yes.
It's called Kellyville. It was remnant of Levittown. They're all exactly the same. They're 3 bedrooms, living room, 1 bath, and a tiny kitchen. And it's all in one section in Katuitt. So they're going to be 75 shortly. And I just wanted to say a second thing. I grew up in this town. I went to school with children of all colors, and everybody used the same water bubblers. So I'm not aware of separate water stations in Barnstable or on Cape Cod. Certainly down south, it was very common, but I don't believe it occurred here, to the best of my knowledge.
Jennifer?
Hi there. First of all, I just want to say thank you. You have
Hi,
been
Jen.
instrumental in a number of Osterville-related historical endeavors through the years, so thank you.
Yeah, I'm feeling
for-
like the historic thing in the room at the moment.
So good. I think a number of points that everybody's already touched on. One is communication. I think that's so critically important to outreach, that people do respond when they know about things that are happening to buildings or structures that they love. So getting that feedback from the Historical Commission when there are properties or structures that are in each one of our villages, that if we as community members or historical museums and societies can spread that word. I'll also put on my president of Cape and Islands Historical Association hat right now, that we do have a network of sharing that information, and we do have a social media Facebook presence. So we do get that out. But I always say the more the merrier. So the more we have out there, the better. I do also agree with the vista issue, because there's so many vistas within each one of our villages that we love, and that's part of the fabric of why we're here and why we love this place and why we want to support and preserve history, but also celebrate it. I think that's really important. Getting out to our younger population, we had a tour of the kindergartners from Cape Cod Academy last year, brought them out to the boat shops to see the boats. Who do we outreach to? Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, every group that we can think of in terms of after-school programs. Barnstable Recreation is also a great resource. Barnstable's fifth grade classes come through a tour of our museum and other Barnstable locations as well. But it's even more than that we have interns and we work with high school and college and graduate student interns as well. And there are a number of programs and grants out there that will actually fund more in-depth research by some of these younger historical scholars. So that is a great thing. And in terms of the question of, what age do you preserve or what historic period, I really do think, I know it's a lot of work, but I think it really is a case-by-case basis based on everything from where the structure is, how it fits in its surrounding neighborhood, the architecture, the ownership, what happened there, who built it. We could go on and on, that there are so many levels of that. But the real key is getting that communication out there. And I also, 3 cheers for the town of Barnstable and all the inventorying of these
Yes.
beautiful properties. That is such a great resource. I have people come into the museum all the time, and if you haven't, if you've looked at an old house within the town of Barnstable, or old structure, I should say, we have churches and markets and all sorts of buildings that are inventoried. You can very easily check in with your local historical society or museum, and they will be happy to help you find out whatever they can on that property. And it's really an invaluable resource. And so thanks to all the efforts of everyone who have come before us to do that. But more work to be done, more outreach, more communication is terrific. But I think the topic of preserving historical and cultural resources and celebrating them is really the key here.
Celebration is very important.
Yes, to go
I'm going to
for
come
it.
back to my favorite airfield in a moment, because I'm hoping in
Fabulous.
September there will be a 95th anniversary celebration. It's a
Fabulous.
great time for people of all ages to enjoy something.
So good.
I wonder if people, young people, people under 30, people under 35, pick a number, would be any more engaged by a dull old building like the TD Bank building if they could visit it with somebody who was a little bit passionate about it and could talk with them about it and explain what it is that interests them. It might not be the same thing that they would get interested in, but maybe just knowing someone else had bought in a little bit, there'd be a greater likelihood, no certainty, but a greater likelihood.
Young people need housing.
I'm sorry?
Young people need housing.
I get
so
that,
therefore,
for
since
sure.
if they need housing, they're less likely to care about a bank when they're sleeping 5 to a bedroom.
Oh, I know.
and,
I'm
you
not
know,
thinking of it as a bank
No,
anymore.
I'm just
thinking
saying,
of it
like,
as a building.
As a building, right, most people who are struggling to afford to live
Mm-hmm.
would knock down half the historical buildings if it meant that they were going to get housing instead of being sitting on a wait list for a year to 5 to 10 years. So
I get that.
personally, I think any building that's in the way of making sure that we have housing for everyone, I don't care if they knock it down.
Okay. That's fair.
Sue?
Glad we're talking about communication and outreach, but another area of that I just don't think this town does enough of is outreach to tourists. We have some fantastic historical resources in our town, and I just don't think that they're advertised enough. You know, we have these wonderful little museums in every village, and we just don't do enough of that. And I'm not putting that on the historical commission, but I think that would be something that would be not only for townspeople, but for tourists. A lot of tourists are really interested in that stuff, and yet they don't have a place to go to find out what's available, or they don't know that there's a historical society in Katuitt if they're vacationing in Katuitt.
No, that's a very good point. One of the tasks of the Historical Commission is to advise the town and the town council on matters of policy concerning historical matters, and that's totally relevant. Obviously, that's happening through the planning process as
Yeah.
well. I think networking is a tremendous boost to helping tourists understand if they're visiting one place, there might be 5 others in the town that
That's
they would
exactly
enjoy.
right. Yeah.
I've been around here long enough to remember when parochialism ruled the day amongst historical societies, particularly, but all museums. They were really protecting their own little fiefdoms and their own constituency, and if you were in their room, they didn't want to tell you about somebody else's. And I think we've outgrown that. grown past that,
Yeah,
excuse me, is a
yeah.
better way to put it. And I think that could be very helpful, and it's a very inexpensive way to help spread the word.
To help the historical societies and
For sure.
museums.
Oh, absolutely.
To have more people visiting.
Yeah.
The last thing is talking about the houses that are under demolition,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. One way to let people know that that's happening would be to put a sign at the building and say, this building is being discussed for demolition or whatever, and if you want to comment, this is how you can comment on that. I used to advocate for that, for if a piece of land was being subdivided, that ought to be, then people would know about it. That never went over that well.
I feel I'm talking to an activist. I know I am.
But
I get your point. I don't
That
know
would
whether
be
the
a
commission
way
can
to
do stuff
let
like
people
that. But
know, you know, and everybody that would walk or drive by that building could see it.
So if I receive notice of an intent to demolish a building through the planning department, and I reach some determination that it needs to be brought to a public hearing, the hearing is advertised in the paper, which I think is marginally exposed these days, unfortunately. There is an abutter list that
The
is
abutters,
mailed
it goes to
and that
abutters.
helps. And I've had this conversation with staff recently, because what I'm wanting to do is say, I want to pick up the phone and use property lookup and call up the next door neighbor and say, did you know that this is happening? I
Yeah,
can't do
yeah.
that.
And you can
Because
do
I have
abutters of
proprietary knowledge
abutters as
of
well.
the information, and it's outside of the hearing process.
Yeah.
So I can't do that. But maybe I could hope that my historical society people are looking at their villages and are reading those things in the paper, however boring and hard to find they may be, and will help alert people. And that's how we find out if people care. If they don't, they don't. And that's valuable to know.
There are some things that are done to abutters of abutters as well, and that would enlarge the circle. I don't know whether that's by law or by, how that works.
I
but-
believe I think the radius for notification varies with the circumstance, and I said I'm new to this game a little bit as the chairperson. I don't remember what the radius is for a historical hearing, but it's better than some and less than others. So we had a hearing for a property that was contained on the Hyannisport Golf Course. Think of how many butters there were. There were hundreds of abutters. We didn't hear from very many of them, but we heard from a few. So it seems to vary all over the ballpark, depending on where the place
Cheryl,
is.
you had a question?
I'm just going to try to build a bridge between what you have said, Fran has said, and what Asia has said, the
thank you.
comment there. Just to take note that America is a relatively young country in comparison to the rest of the world. But when Europeans came here, first community was Jamestown, and the next one was Plymouth. And that's the history of it. Then more people from Europe, Asia, South America, all over the place. But it became their home, and they became a community together for the most part. But I think what we have is a sense to preserve the history, but at the same time welcoming changes and growth to integrate into the community. We have people, tourism was mentioned. We have tourists who come here from all over the world because it's this part of America that was where America started, even though America wasn't first. It was part of England at first, and before that, and then the Indians, of course, throughout many different tribes who are still welcomed us into their community, which was wonderful. And there is evidence that prior to that, the Vikings. So, I mean, it is what it is. But I appreciate the housing, but we do deal with houses and historical houses. And one of the reasons it comes to us because developers want to develop it into something else or change it, or in other commissions just to upgrade or whatever else. But we're there kind of as a gatekeeper because if we have to preserve, to foster the community and our historical culture, which is shared by everybody, and some entering at different times, of course. That's part of life. But sometimes you can't save it, and then it does become housing. It's a part of looking at the overall picture, not just a very individual path on it. It's a whole road system.
May
But we
I?
try.
Just quickly, a comment, because I see what Asia said about housing, at the same as it's important that we don't lose who we are, and that we have to have a pattern. And if we knock down everything, it's just like, oops, you're tearing apart. We can't do that. So I like it that we are preserving, we are making history, and as a path, and our kids will really appreciate that we are conscious of what you're doing as a commission and others that are working. Yes, so that we do all of that. We are, but I would say that word didn't come to integrate. Yes, and it's not just like this necessity, the urgency can't not dictate. So that we do that, but yeah, that even want to learn more about the TD Bank because I don't know much. I'm sorry. Yes, so busy with so much, but yes. So and I know that my kids would want to learn more. So that's when we are saying that we are missing this more communication and more interaction in the community. Is that way I ask for as an immigrant and being the voice of my community here. Is that yes, please fill us with things that we need for us to learn. We are here and we want to be part of this.
For sure.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Bob, for that.
Could I leave you with two brief nuggets?
Brief.
One is that I recommend a visit to the city of Providence, Rhode Island. It's just a city, but it's a pretty good example of things that work and things that don't. And I would say, think of it, it's small enough as a walking opportunity to some degree, or a public transit and walking opportunity. And just take in what you see and try and evaluate it in the context of being from here. This is much smaller, but it has some similarities. The other is when I first began my preservation studies at Roger Williams, they introduced the concept of preservation by assigning us a book by a woman named Jane Jacobs, and it's called The Life and Death of the Great American City. It was published in 1973. It's an antique like I am. But it covered an awful lot of very interesting material about the evolution of a busy city street or an urban setting, and it talked about the place that each of the evolving or devolving buildings on that street have at any given point in time. And it's almost irrespective of preservation considerations. It's more like helping understand if there's a value, what the value is, and it might help a lot of people looking at difficult decisions from a planning point of view. It's not a short book, I'll worry you with that, but it'll prop something up when you go to bed at night.
All right, thank you very much. It's time for us to discuss and review these chapters, the draft culture, heritage, design chapter, including issues, opportunities, and policies. So we'll regroup to the workshop format. Right, we're ready. What do you think? All right, we finished our discussion of the draft review of culture, heritage, and design chapters, and Jim is going to give us an update on that. We will not get to discuss and review the facilities chapter, and we'll also put off to the next meeting the town's future land use map. But go ahead, Jim, and give us the recap.
Excellent, thank you. So just a note for anyone in the public who's following along, for this round, we did one group exercise, as we typically do two, but it was a good discussion with all together, and so here we're just quickly going to report out what we spoke about. So we began with heritage preservation, and we took in a lot from what Bob had started the conversation with. And so we talk about the certified local government and looking at other communities and what they've done, looking into Providence support and incentives, potentially to help, looking for incentives for private homeowners, looking at when we're talking about inventories and educational materials, making sure that we're adding and considering other communities that have come to Cape Cod and made this place their home. Talking to developers and encourage and inform them of the historical aspects of structures, especially when they're coming in for potential redevelopment of a site, or they're looking to alter what could be a historic structure, giving them educational materials that we would like to as a community prioritize. Not new construction, but renovations that are appropriate. And when we talk about adding additional properties to the National Historic Register, we had named a few, and I think it was consensus that there are so many more that we should be considering, and so we're going to give that another a look and try and add a number of properties to at least set the tone that there's a number of National Register nominations that could be out there. It was talked about that we have a number of historic commissions and societies, and our CPC, and our staff that work on preservation. And really, we should start working to better bring those entities together, so that we can not only work off of educating each other on what has worked and what hasn't worked, but also talk about funding opportunities and ways to improve in coordination. And then we also talked about historic structures and flood zones. Understanding Cape Cod Commission has done some work on that. We had talked about, as a town, we talked about it over in Hyannis Harbor and over in Barnstable Harbor. So definitely a priority for the coming years to take a closer look at all of our historic structures and where they sit in our flood zones. So ways to better reach out to our underrepresented populations. We talked about education, sharing knowledge, going to the students, working with the youth commissions, working with our schools to integrate this into curriculum of the history of our community, the history of our architecture, our villages, et cetera. Integrating, now we have modern technology, so being able to work through things like hybrid meetings and adding things like TikToks to get the younger generations excited about, or at least interested in looking at our history and our community. We had a long and good discussion about our view sheds, our vistas and view sheds, and ways in which we can potentially preserve not just the views, but also the ways to water. So both of those aspects we would like to preserve and enhance. Looking at Private properties and public access to beaches was an ongoing topic that we wanted to explore further in terms of regulatory structures. And we were going to check on that Barnstable landscape assessment. When we talk about redevelopment and creating mixed-use walkable neighborhoods, we talk about very place-based specific locations, and each place having a different aspect of what human scale is, what historic architecture is, and what the urban form is. So very specific, and I think, as we progress in this process, some of those action items will probably pull from these strategies. And when we talk about visioning, consider focus on village centers or residential neighborhoods. When we're talking about visioning for design standards and character of each village, similar to what we talked about above with human scale and historic architecture. Again, very focused on specific villages, those villages and those unique qualities of each village that should be pulled out. So very likely, you're going to have 7 different kind of visions for the design and the future development of those village centers.
Can I make a quick addition to that? Going back to when we did surveys of the community and things that people were looking for, and finding community, making community, bringing people together was very big. So I'm always trying to think of things like that. And so when we're doing master plans for villages, what I think that should be brought up to people. It might not be something that people think of, but what are things that can be done in the village centers or in the villages that are place-based that would help to bring people together, that would create spaces for that kind of thing?
Excellent, thank you. Once we moved through our historic preservation section, we begin into design and community character. And one of the items that we discussed a lot was kind of the roadside beautification, making sure that landscaping is maintained, talking about mitigation of invasive species, educating and recommending improvements if it's not on public property, but having some educational materials about things that would thrive and survive in the locations. The right trees in the right places is what we really talked about, and keeping those scenic roads scenic, trying to keep those mature trees where possible. And adding sidewalks too. It doesn't have to be an either-or situation. There's plenty of opportunities to add sidewalks while maintaining our wonderful scenic roads.
I'm sorry. I keep thinking of things, and I don't know if this is a place for this. It probably should have, but just the whole idea of outlawing pesticides and herbicides, and What? Did you say outlawing or outlawing? Or, doing something to control the use of.
Yeah, I think we had a good discussion about that. I believe it is incorporated in other.
About that.
But
yeah.
Can't hurt to add it again.
Although state law really doesn't allow local communities to set these limits. That's what other towns have been trying to do with fertilizers. So it's a
Well,
sketchy.
then we need to work on that.
Well, through the legislature.
Can I suggest that we amend that to say to explore how to control the use of? Is that all right? So we're changing it to explore how to control the use of. The proper use of. Is everybody okay with that? Because there's sometimes when you have to use something, there's sometimes when you have to use something like that. Thank you. But as long as it's using the proper area in the proper way and the proper thing. Thank you.
Okay.
Great. And so Our next section, our policy, talks about sea level rise and protecting historic structures and the visual character. And so we just highlighted the fact that there's large amounts of land and structures that are currently and will be impacted by the rise of the sea and our coastline. So thinking of ways in which we can make sure to preserve these structures still, and whether that is retrofitting, that is retreating, what have you. And then we followed it up with arts and culture discussion, and we really had a good discussion about integrating and reaching out to the immigrant community to make sure that the arts and culture is all encompassing and incorporating all backgrounds in order to allow for all of our population to thrive in the arts and culture community. We also talk about more safe and connected, opportunities for arts and culture. Lots of lighting should be added and proper walkways. We talk about educating tourists. That was something that the conversation started early in the evening about historic preservation, and it continued on into arts and culture. That's another opportunity where we can. We already do a good job, but just enhancing that where we can. And again, coordinating public art opportunities throughout our community, including our immigrant community. So back to when we're talking about arts and culture, trying to incorporate the youth population again. Same conversations we had with historic preservation and community building. Arts and culture is no different, just trying to get the youth population active and interested in our arts and cultural community. We looked at ways in which we can better our year-round arts venues. There was a lot of discussions about better coordination, improving farmers markets, improving different aspects of historical museums, improving our recreational sports opportunities. We've talked about that a lot in previous economic development chapters, but again here in the arts and cultural community chapter, talking about indoor recreational or even outdoor recreational opportunities for our community. And lastly, again, the farmers markets came up. We talked about collaborating with local farmers and farms to create arts, music, and events. Talked about just one farmers market over in Osterville at the Osterville Museum, but there could be other opportunities. And we also talked about adding community gardens where it could make sense. And with that, I think that's all the comments from this evening.
All right. Any other questions? We're good on that? All right. Moving on. We received no written correspondence to discuss. And also of note, our next meeting is August 22nd, 2024 at 5:30 p.m. to be held in this hearing room at Town Hall. So mark your calendars. Any other discussion? With that, I'll entertain.
Second.
Any discussion? All members in favor of adjourning signify by saying aye.
Aye.
That's unanimous. Thank you very much.